Hello, Eric. How are you,
Hey,
sir?
Ashley, how's it going?
It is going very well. I'm very into the well the very well framed plant life you have behind you here. This is like a really lovely setup.
Yeah, we got the suburban jungle.
Yeah, it's good. It's always fun to see backgrounds now that we live in this digital rectangle world for workshops and lessons and things like that. Audience, wonderful to see you all. Thank you for joining us today. If you could do me a favor and just type into the chat that you can see us and hear us, if that is the case. We want to make sure our AV and tech is all set up so that you all are getting the most out of today's experience. And also let us know where you're tuning in from. We're really excited today to be able to share some wisdom with you. Want to make sure that that you're able to soak it all up. So just type into the chat whether you can see us or hear us. And just so you know, okay, great. Thank you so much. Oh, Heidi, good to see you from New Hampshire. All right. Looks like, oh, Amores, thank you so much for letting us know that your AV is coming in clear. Um, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Ashley. I am with the Discover team at Teachable, which means basically that I get to hang out with incredible creators, people who are brilliant in their fields and are willing to share some of their expertise with us and with you all here in this audience today. And I was telling Eric before we got started that I am especially excited about today's workshop, today's event, because I am a non-designer, non-technical person, but I have I have really strong reactions to design that I encounter out in the world and sleek user interface. So it's great to be able to talk with somebody who has built a career out of not just figuring out how to create really gorgeous UI, but also how to help others learn those skills. So Erik Kennedy, it's great to have you. And I would say you're on the entrepreneur, like independent UX UI designer. You're on the West Coast in the US, Seattle, is that
Yep.
right? You've had
Yep.
like all of the degrees lately. It's been hot out,
It has
out
been.
by you.
Yeah, for sure.
Glad to glad to have you here. You've worked with a ton of companies too, and I'd love for you to, I know you'll do some introduction of yourself, but would love for you to just share a little bit about your background and some of the work that you've done on designing and UI for companies like Amazon and Rome Research. Um, and I know that you are a frequent speaker, sharing your wisdom about startup businesses and uh, how to kind of translate the principles of design and UI that you incorporate into your work so that they can be learning for other folks.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear from you today, and we'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so I'll just give like a real brief intro bit and then we'll dive into a live example because I think rather than looking at me, you'd rather look at a design in Figma. And we'll be talking about how to take something that was a submission actually from one of my students and just spiff it up in a number of ways and kind of different strategies for making user interface design look much, much nicer. But yeah, so first, just a little bit of intro. I came to design by basically every other field in tech. When I got to college, I programmed for the very first time, and I thought it was just like wonderful and magical and decided I was going to be a programmer. And that lasted until impact with the real world. And I realized that programming, at least as a like working as a developer at a larger company, is maybe like a little less enchanting than just creating your own side project and staying up till 3 a.m. and just like coding stuff and needing no one's permission and no one's money, and you just do it. So I decided that I would actually switch roles slightly, and I ended up going into PM. And I was a PM at Microsoft for 3 years. And by the end of it, I was really leaning towards the UX side of things. That was kind of like the days where I'd leave work and feel the most energized were all the days where I was doing like wireframing or usability testing or user research or that kind of stuff. So I said, all right, you know what? I need to quit and just become a designer. And very quickly, upon picking up some UX clients, I realized clients in the real world don't just want you to make usable boxes and arrows. Like as soon as you've got some nice wireframes for them, they say, this is great, but can you make it look like a real app? And the truth was I really couldn't. But like any good freelancer, I said, sure. And hit pause on my little clock and decided that I would figure out how to do visual design. And unfortunately, so much of the advice that I found out there, like just Googling around or even reading some of the design books that are still popular about visual design, it's like largely impractical advice. It was stuff like color theory and baseline grids and type scales and all sorts of ideas that to me couldn't make a bad design look better. And so what I wanted to do was come up with all the strategies or ideas that I could take my perfectly crappy looking design and actually make it look good using those ideas and those frameworks. So that's what I've been thinking about a lot. And now there's a whole course on it, Learn UI Design on Teachable. I'm sure you've heard a little bit about that, but for now, we will just jump into the live example. And I'll be talking about one particular example that uses, let's say, just a bunch of strategies from throughout the course. All right, so I'm going to attempt to go into Figma here. And then
while you're doing that, Eric,
yeah, go ahead.
I'll pull that screen up and let everybody know that the course Erik just mentioned is linked and pinned right at the top of your YouTube stream. Ooh, this is like a little meta view here. Let me pull this.
Yeah, it's getting a little crazy. So I wanted to paste into the chat the Figma link. I don't know if I have the ability to paste it in the chat though.
I don't think you will, Erik. If you send it to me in our like secret private chat, then I can post it to the comments for everybody else. Yeah.
Fun.
Okay. There we go. I got it. All right, friends. And thank you, Naomi, for letting me know that my camera's a little laggy. I will work on that. But in the meantime, let me pull up this delicious looking screen from Erik here and share the Figma link, which should be there in the comments now. And like I was saying, check out Erik's course info on the YouTube page, and feel free to type in any comments or questions you have. I'll be monitoring those throughout the event, and making sure that we're touching on all the questions you have during the session. All right,
cool.
Erik.
And I also have a monitor off to the side that is monitoring comments as well, so I should be able to address some of them in a little bit less than real time. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll try and get to those too. All right, first order of business. I see some people are joining the Figma file, which is awesome. So I'm actually going to switch off everyone's cursors so I don't see a bunch of cursors flying around here, or else that's just going to get a little bit silly. All right, there we go. So this is a submission from my student R10, and it's from a live website. You can go to it, Pokidoke, and it's a poke restaurant. So Hawaiian raw fish, sort of just like light seafood bowls. Super delicious if you never had it. So he submitted this and he said, you know what, like this is for a real client. It looks all right. But it's not quite there. And he said, I'd love to see what you could do with this. And I actually ended up featuring this in one of my live redesign sessions, which all students are invited to. Pardon me, I got a little bit of a lingering cough here. So we're going to talk about what to do to spiff this up a little bit. And we're going to start with like maybe one of the most fundamental secrets of UI design, which is the most important thing we can do is actually start by coming up with a list of adjectives of what we want this site to be like, what the brand should be. And this is like a little bit of a simplification if you talk to any real brand designer, but for us, it's going to be perfect. We're just going to come up with a list of adjectives for how this site should make you feel. And so if I just go and start typing in some stuff right here, I'll get a new text box going. And if I think about this Poke site, like what are sort of those brand adjectives that come to mind? To me, this might be things like island or ocean, something tropical or relaxing. Like that's sort of the vibe I get from this food. It's like island food, tropical, relaxing. One thing I like about it is it's always fresh. It's cool. It's nice on a hot day, which also sort of vibes with the tropical island thing. So these are just like sort of some of the ideas of what I might ultimately want the brand of the site to elicit. And this is not set in stone. I'm picking what I feel like is kind of the right idea to go with based on like what the food is and what the vibe of the food is. You could also do something totally different, right? You could have like completely upscale poke or something like that. So we're just going with one set of brand adjectives that probably matches about what, say, your average poke restaurant might want for their website. So tropical, relaxing, island, ocean, fresh, cool. What else? I talk about this concept in Learn UI Design of having the 5 major brands. I say there's 5 types of brands overall that any designer should learn how to design for. And one of them is friendly. Friendly is just something that you often get requests for if you're a freelance designer. And if you want to watch more of those, I'm really quickly going to drop a link. Go and check out the other YouTube video. This is actually a free lesson from Learn UI Design, but I talk a lot more about those other brands. So you can go look at that as well. All right. So like I was saying, this big secret with UI design is we're going to take these adjectives, this list of adjectives that we've come up with, and we're going to try and translate it into everything on this site. And user interface design is pretty straightforward because most of the time, there's about 3 buckets we need to worry about. We need these adjectives to be reflected in 3 things: the color, the typography, and the imagery. And if we can take these adjectives and we can kind of have typography that matches these adjectives, and we can have imagery that matches this brand, and we can have colors that match this brand, like there's still more to it than that, but we're going to be able to come up with something that really feels like it works and goes together and looks designed. So let's start with maybe the toughest one. Excuse me again. Toughest one could be typography. Because at first glance, you don't look at a font necessarily and you think, wow, that looks friendly. Or unfortunately, the fonts that look friendly, it's going to be like Comic Sans. Like everyone knows that looks friendly, but Comic Sans also looks like it's in a comic book, right? This is not quite what we're going for. We want a really good, high quality, not so overused font that conveys friendliness without conveying like, I am not a graphic designer and I just picked the first font I thought of, right? So fortunately, with Learn UI Design, I actually try and like kind of, what's the term? Jumpstart this process. So I've picked over 100 of the top fonts that I use in my own projects. And I've categorized them by sans serif, serif, slab serif, and other. And so this is an awesome resource for all Learn UI Design students. You can see we even have at least one student in here besides me right now. And I'm just going to cut to the chase, which is under this particular classification, grotesque and Gothic sans. You don't need to worry about that now. It's a fancy designer term. But under this classification, there are a series of fonts that in my mind often come off as somewhat quirky or friendly. And here are 7 of the best ones. Or is that 6? That's 6. So one thing I should say is all of these are either free or cheap, or for this Adobe icon, they're free with Adobe Creative Cloud. So if you're already paying for Photoshop or something, then you have free access to these fonts as well. And then this one is free if you have Mac, but if you want to host it on the website, it's not. Okay, anyhow, I'm going to sort of skip ahead and pick one that I know is going to work well. I'm going to pick Carla. Carla is like a fantastic font. When you zoom in on it, you're going to see it's got this really relaxed spacing. One thing I kind of like about it, it has sort of this affected awkwardness. And we dive way deep into this in Learn UI Design. But even if you look at this ampersand or something, it looks like it's just like, oh, it's just like really stretching out and kind of owning its space. And it's a little silly looking. Same thing with this G, right? It's got this like floppy ear that's just flying out here. And, some of these other ones do, but they're all kind of in that quirky, friendly vibe. And so those are some of the details that I see in this font. But again, we're just going to try and get through things here. So we say, okay, let's pick Carla. That's what we'll be using for type. So I'm going to copy a lot of stuff from this Poke menu. Actually, here's what we're going to do first. I'm going to press A to create a new artboard or a new frame. We'll do a desktop one. Slide it right here. And then let's take, this is the logo on the main site, which they dropped for this page, but I like it because it's hot pink, and that's kind of a friendly, fun color. There's going to be something we can do with that. We'll talk about it in a second. I'll grab this like menu text. I'll put the menu up here. We'll get it going to the right. And let's start putting things in Carla. Let's just kind of see how that looks. This is size 30, which is way too big. I'll zoom in a second. I'm doing this. I got to get some stuff on the page first, and then we'll go and fix everything up detail by detail. Okay. And then one thing Artem mentions is if you're going to order poke from this restaurant, you currently have to scroll down through this giant list of stuff. Well, that's not very good information density. And in my other course, Learn UX Design, we talk plenty about this. It's more where you go for the information density stuff. We want to try and display this in a not as small a space as possible, but somewhere where a user still understands the relationship between all this information, which is basically, these are 6 steps in a process. This is like the general price, and then you pick a base, a sauce, then you pick extras, then you pick your poke, which just feels redundant right here. In Learn UX Design, I talk about making sure to be very careful about the nouns you use in here. I'm actually going to call this like protein, because that feels more descriptive. And I don't know if it's just like traditional to call poke the meat, but we're going to use protein for now. So our users we piggyback on their understanding that they already have from, say, ordering a protein at Chipotle. Then you pick your toppings, and the final thing you pick is your drizzle. So base, sauce, extras, protein, toppings, drizzle. That's like a 6-step process. And rather than displaying it in one giant column, my hunch is we can actually display it in 6 mini columns. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up real quick. The details of this aren't super important. It's just kind of the general concept. We're saying, what is the information that we're looking at? Oh, it's a 6-step process. How should we display that information? Maybe we should display it by putting the steps side by side, and that would be way more efficient than putting them one on top of the other. Crazy stuff, I know. All right. So we're going to make these columns.
It makes a big difference, though, when it comes to the type of attention span that we have nowadays, right? The number of times that I X out of something because it's too much scrolling or not intuitive enough, the information isn't presented intuitively enough. It's like pretty, it's a lot. I'm very lazy.
That's a fair point, right? And like, so I'll be the first person to talk about the importance of visual design, but yeah, even for me, it's like, well, yeah, I guess I got a bunch of stuff to say here. Yeah, the visual design. So certainly the usability and making sure the information displays like good enough and the user understands what's going on here, super important. But the visual design is also like this because there's so many websites where I will literally, like, if they don't look very well designed, I'll be like, I don't think this is like really an up-to-date site by professionals.
Not
and I'll
for
close
me.
out because I just don't trust it. And
Same.
So we like stereotype websites, but the answer is we want everyone to be able to make things look really good. So, okay.
Erik, while you're finishing this adjustment up, Marlena Pearl is asking if you could repeat where to get the good fonts table link from. I know you said that. I was in the process of changing camera situations there, so I might have missed it.
That's a resource for students. So it's actually just in the course right now. But if you sign up, it's in the 4th unit, and I think it's the 2nd lesson in the 4th unit. And cool. It's a secret Figma file. Top secret.
All right, I'm gonna drop another link, Marlena, just so you have that in the course for easy access.
All right, so I'm gonna copy some of this text styling. Paste the text styling.
Naomi agreeing with us here that they jump out of websites when the design is not quite inducing enough trust. Design is important, they say. And yes, it's a good thing that we have a lot of smart people who are around in charge of design and sharing their information and wisdom with us on that.
One thing I'm doing here is as I make these subtitles, I'm looking for just like something that feels a little more interesting, because I could make them you know, just like this. But this looks really boring. And it also doesn't really signal immediately that it's a title because it's just, I mean, it's the same weight. It's like it's a couple font sizes bigger. So one thing is I talk a lot about the squint test. The squint test is like if someone squinted their eyes and couldn't read any of the individual words, would they still have a general idea of what is going on that page? And what I'd want to do is if they squinted their eyes here, they should basically be like, oh, yeah, this is like maybe 6 steps, or like there's different columns and maybe you do one thing in each column or something, and there's some information above. Like, but if they can kind of come up with the idea that there's a bunch of columns and they each have this little title here, even if they can't read the individual words, that's still success in my book. That's like what we're aiming for. So and then I also encourage students to always like explore weights and styles. So I picked this font Carla, but if you look, like I went with extra bold italic, and that's not always the right answer, but oh, hopefully my Figma's online. This is weird. I'm getting strange messages here. It's not always the right answer to go
with
the boldest weight, but you know, here it does happen to work, and the italic looks kind of interesting. To me, it almost feels a little bit like some poster or something, but I don't know. I kind of like these vibes. So we've thrown some stuff up here. We are going to talk a little bit more though about the other 2 buckets, the other 2 major buckets I was talking about, right? So we've dealt a little bit with typography. Let's take a little splash into color and also into imagery, because in some, those are like the 3 big things we need to get right for our brand. All right, so we could do it in any order. Let's run with color. So when I go back to my adjectives, tropical, relaxing, island, ocean, fresh, cool, friendly. To me, I hear these and I immediately have an idea about what sorts of colors I'm going to have. So like I can go ahead and, you know, we could pick some out. I always work in the HSB color system. This is just a much more intuitive color system, very similar to HSL if you've ever used that for CSS. But what I'm going to do, like when I think of, say, ocean or something or beach, I'm thinking of like kind of blue greens and green blues, greenish blues, right? So maybe something like that, or maybe something a little bit just on the other side, a little bit more bluer like that. Maybe something like a yellow, like a golden sand on the beach or whatever. This feels a little bit bright. I'm going to go, this is the brightness. I'm going to crank the brightness all the way up. Saturation is kind of like the richness. Maybe it'll be pretty rich too. So these are the sorts of colors that I think meet these brand adjectives. And it turns out, like this is no secret, there's a lot of sites that have somewhat similar color palettes to this sort of thing. And I've found by researching almost 100 of the best sites that I could find and the best like multicolored designs, that one of the patterns that happens when you have these sorts of colors is you're not gonna, like when you have these 3 colors, that says something about the other colors you're gonna have. For instance, you're not gonna have a really rich red necessarily, or in the majority of cases, you're not gonna have this kind of thing, like some dark rich red. Looks like, what is this, like blood on the beach? It doesn't make any sense. Instead,
it's a little off-putting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. The metaphor and the color. Instead, pardon me, geez. Oftentimes, you'll find that rather than a red, you'll have something that's like a little more pink. And actually, this confirms what we've already seen, which is they picked pink for a logo. And I don't think that's coincidence. I think there's sort of this sense that pink is just this like fresh, relaxing, somewhat tropical color. So pretty soon we can start to assemble a color palette just like that. And actually, to make this like way easier for students, I think one thing that's great is to have a bunch of good default swatches. So I have this Learn UI Design color palette. This is another resource that students have access to. And it's kind of tough to see, but there's basically 6 colors of a variety of different palettes in here. So here I have one called the Playful palette. Red, playful, a playful yellow, green, blue. There's a purple. This is actually the most similar to the one we're going for right now. Just because this is sort of, it's almost like an archetype of color in UI design. Oh, there's another pink option if we want.
What makes it that? Is there something that's visually distinct about it that gives you more latitude in terms of what you can do with it as a part of your UI color palette?
So, what do you mean?
like what makes it, you said it's an archetype. I'm just wondering like what makes it an archetype?
Yeah, I don't know that there's really a hard answer to this. One thing that I found, and this is getting really deep and dirty with colors, is essentially if you went and you took like Google's color palette, which just looks like a red, a yellow, a blue, just the most plain red, the most plain blue. It's not pinkish red, it's not orangish red, it's just red.
Right.
Like if you went and you took those colors and you actually added kind of this cyan sort of like greenish blue, if you kind of tinted everything towards greenish blue, you would actually end up with a palette that looks a lot more like this. So I'm not sure what that means, but it's almost like you're putting on like ocean colored goggles and then viewing the like 4-crayon Crayola set. And instead what you're seeing is going to be like the tropical paradise. So I don't know beyond that, but these colors do seem to go together, both as rectangles on a Figma file, as well as in many, many designs out there. And that's not to say we shouldn't edit them or play with them, but it's just kind of a good starting point. And especially for beginning designers, once you can associate what sorts of colors are saying what sorts of brands or trying to convey what sorts of brands, it's really going to help you out.
That's a really good, I like the, it's almost as if you have a kind of like baseline that lets you learn some of the rules and principles, even if you don't have, for example, a background in, in color theory, right? But you can kind of learn some of the relationships between colors. And then once you've gotten that foundation, can play with it on your own.
Yeah, totally.
Which is very cool. We've got a couple questions coming in, Erik.
Sure.
I'm curious to know, as in your experience doing UI, can you talk a little bit about accessibility, like what you know about accessibility when you're choosing fonts and colors?
Yes. So, I mean, for UI designers, you don't need to know the full spectrum of usability. A lot of that stuff is going to more fall on the developer. For UI designers, one of the most critical things, and one of the things that kind of gets a lot of airtime, is color contrast, because we're picking the colors. And this specifies that for some clients, it's required. Like if you're working for the government, you're going to have certain color contrast guidelines that you need to follow. For other clients, you may not need to, but it's still a nice thing. And this basically is like, there's an equation where you take each of these colors and you figure out the contrast between them, how easy it is to read one on top of the other. And there's basically a minimum contrast level that's required. So one thing that we can do, let's say we want to meet, it's called AA accessibility guidelines, with this white on pink, because sometimes that can be a bit of a dicey combination. So one thing I like to do here is I'll go copy this color, and then I'm going to jump into the browser, and I actually have an accessibility tool that I've created, and it's free. It's on my site. You don't need to buy the course to see it or use it. But if you go here and you paste in your color, basically it's going to assume that I want to contrast against white. And I assume that because that is the most common color that you're going to be curious about as a UI designer. White just pops up all the time. So it's looking at two situations. For larger bold text, which is over size 24 pixels, definitely meeting it with that headline. It's basically saying, yes, the pink we chose is good enough to contrast against white. If this was very small text, we'd want to use, and here my tool is coming up with the closest shade of pink that meets AA guidelines for small text and contrast in terms of how much it contrasts against white. So this is good because a lot of tools will kind of show you, they'll tell you what the contrast is, but they won't tell you what's the closest color that's actually good enough. So that's what I tried to do with this tool. I find it super useful and use it all the time myself.
Yeah,
so that's just one tidbit about accessibility, and then there's a whole lesson on it too.
I'm gonna put this link here in the chat so everybody so everyone can access this important accessibility tool.
Yeah,
thanks for bringing up that question, Naomi. I really like that.
So like where we put these colors in, it's kind of up to us. It's not like there's a bunch of elements on this page demanding color quite yet. But we've got these swatches off to the side that we can reach for whenever we decide we need to. Pardon me, this cough, it's ridiculous. So
need some ginger. What else is available for poke from the poke menu?
oh right, yeah. Well, I wonder if they have
To
tea.
help with the
Probably
cough.
have like, I just need some tea is what I need.
Yeah.
Ooh, bubble tea.
Bubble tea. There we go.
So let's move on and start talking about imagery, and then we're going to kind of come and combine all of these things together. Now, what's my time check here? When do I want to wrap this up by? Like how many more minutes?
I'd say we've got about 20 more minutes or so.
Oh, great. Okay. Does that include question and answer?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll try and wrap this up as quickly as possible, and then if other people have questions, like I'd be happy to talk to a bunch of those. Okay, so imagery.
Sorry, I misspoke. It does not. We will. You've got 20 more minutes, and then we'll save some time for question and answer. So not include.
Fantastic.
Does not include. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Just trying to keep you on your toes.
Great. Well, I'm there. Standing desk. And I could ramble about this stuff all day too. So, yeah, let's then talk a little bit about imagery. So, imagery is like, in my mind, you should just view imagery as like a cheat code for your design. In fact, I say that there's really two things that in my book count as a cheat code for design. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send over just a link to some Twitter tips, and in these are some like little visual design tips that I've posted on Twitter. I talk in there about imagery being a cheat code, about typography being a cheat code. Just you can go look at that in your own time. But what I want to say here is that if you use the best quality imagery possible, it's like, I mean, it can make the difference between a design that just looks astoundingly good and one that looks pretty mediocre. And so here, like, this is fine, but it's really not great imagery. There's not really a focal point. The lighting, it's overlaid with this kind of, I think it's overlaid with a black background, a transparent black background, just so this white text can appear here. And that's fine, but like, we'd want to go and find something better. And so one of the main ways I'm going to do that is I go and I have a bunch of stock websites that offer free stock photography. Unsplash is absolutely the best. So like, first stop for finding any sort of high quality imagery, I'm going to go to Unsplash, and no surprise here, I'm going to search poke and hope it knows what I mean. Yeah. So at this point, like, this is already way better, right? We talk about there being a focal point to some of these images. Yeah, there's a focal point. Like, there's the dish, and then it's just on this little background here. This one might be even better because there's a white background. We could even chop that background out. It's cool having kind of the background blur, the bokeh effect. Yeah, so there's just all sorts of good stuff to pick from. This one feels somewhat stock photo-y, so I don't think I would go with something like that. But just to make things easy, I actually grabbed a couple of three poke photos taken by the same guy. And these are ones that I think they're like suitably high quality enough. There's got to be some way where we can kind of work them in.
Yeah, these are really, really cool looking. There's a huge a lot of opportunity that you have to kind of play with these. They're just different enough, but they're similar enough that it seems like it can be part of the same brand language, but you've got maybe more latitude to play than you did with the original one.
Yeah. Now at some point, like, if this was a real client project, I might ask them if they have other good photography or try and figure out what would be the ideal photo. If we just have this to work with, we're kind of going to do whatever we can here. And that might mean something like bringing it into Figma and kind of set it in crop mode here. Make it square. And then, like, I'm not totally sure what I'm going to do with this. But one thing that kind of struck me here is if we're really going for a friendly vibe, one thing we could kind of do is tilt some of this stuff a few degrees. Like, take this little pink rectangle and tilt that. Or take this yellow rectangle and tilt it the other way. And now they kind of have this fun, like, zany little overlapping.
We're kooky and off kilter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's funny how much, like, when we're talking about brand adjectives, how much like off kilter, like they literally are. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the feel you get. It's like they're just we don't take ourselves too seriously. But if we do that with the menu thing here, then we can also do it with this little image. And like maybe have a few of them. Maybe change their size because they don't need to look perfect. Something like that. But what I'm going to do is go grab these other ones and kind of paste them in. Oh, that didn't work. I think this is something I can do in Figma.
Or you can just overlay and it'll adopt the adjustments that you've made to the previous file. Yeah.
Here we go. So copy that image and put it here. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Okay.
Cool.
So not super critical, but
look at all that funkiness from just a few little tilts.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea.
Oh.
Maybe I don't want them touching too. They're going to avoid each other just a little bit. There's like plenty more that we can do with that. But again, just trying to get something out there kind of quick. Like this is conveying our brand in a very simple way. And everything we've done is like kind of flowed from this, just like, what are these adjectives that describe what we're going for? How do we translate that into the elements that are on user interfaces, the imagery, the typography, and the colors. So now, one thing I might do is look for where there could be other pops of color. One place that we could do this is all the stuff about poke. We're not actually going to go and create this whole menu, but there's a separate section for appetizers and a section for drinks. So one thing we might do is say, like, move this down just a bit. I wonder if I could start by copying this, and it's going to be smaller since it's a subheader, but I could say, like, here's poke. Instead of being size 54, it'll be like, I don't know, 40, maybe a little bit bigger. 4. Choosing things like font sizes here, I don't view that as like too serious of a decision yet. I find that with beginning designers, there's often a desire to like kind of have a design system. That's a real like popular thing to talk about now. But like it's a lot of times you run the risk of just prematurely optimizing your design. And so
yeah.
Okay, one thing I might do.
That's an interesting point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all good. Yeah, so we kind of want to avoid that. Now I have a little bit of a problem because I guarantee that this white and this blue are not going to be, the right contrast. Yeah, so we're going to have to change this. I can go copy this color, but I'm afraid that having such a dark blue is going to ruin the vibe. Like, okay, but I still don't love it. So one thing I might do, and this is where it can get dicey. There's this weird property of white, where if you have white text on any sort of color or image background, it's going to look very clean and neat. You really can run into danger when you have too dark of text here. So one thing I'm going to do is maybe instead of just making this black, I'm actually going to start by grabbing this blue color. But then you can see, so this is actually a graph. You don't know it, but this is math. And this is the y-axis is brightness, and dark is the blackest. And then at the very top, you have white, but you also have just a very bright version of this color itself. And then the x-axis is saturation. So everything on the right is very rich, and everything on the left is just simply a shade of gray. So what I'm going to do is rather than
I can't believe you know that.
Oh yeah, no, it's all good.
That's like a little bonus wisdom from today's session.
Yeah, no, I think like a good way to describe Learn UI design is like, this is what happens when an engineer decides to try and like figure out design.
To do design, yeah.
Like, oh, it's all graphs. Like, and actually, I think I say this in the course, but it's like when you're picking a color, you're picking 3 numbers. Like any pattern that you can possibly detect, it should be detectable. It's just 3 numbers. And fun fact, it's always 3 numbers because color is a 3-dimensional space because we have 3 types of cone cells in our eyes or something like that.
Oh man.
Yeah.
My husband and I had a huge debate about this recently because we were talking about the colors, like the primary colors, and he had a totally different interpretation of what primary colors were than what I did, and it's largely because he's an engineer. But yeah, the number system and the cones, it's fascinating to dive into that. And I'm wondering if any of our audience here, if what Erik is saying is resonating with you, what draws you to this, to UI? Is it, if it's something you're interested in or that you do for practice, like, do you like the way that you get to think about colors? Like, what is it that draws you to this discipline? Just out of curiosity, would love to hear some of that or read some of that typed in the chat. All right, so you've chosen, Erik, a darker color, or is that would that be the right way to say it? That for the subheader, which kind of helps you avoid the contrast trap, right? Not being able to clearly read the word, but not sacrificing that fun blue that you've chosen.
Yeah, and you know what? This isn't the best example of it. Like here, now the text is really this very rich, very dark blue. Let's do a side by side. Let's actually like make sure this looks better than just pitch black. Yeah, I think it does.
I think it does too.
But I'm actually going to make our color a little bit darker. So at this point, it's very subtle. And you can actually do that with all the grays in your entire design. Like there are certain designs where if every gray has just the slightest bit of blue in it, you'll have sort of this cool vibe across everything. And certainly the inverse is true with like red.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah, lots of stuff to play with. All right, so now I'll put some numbers here. In my mind, these numbers are coming off a little strong. And so the numbers are really like, they're kind of like they're like metadata, right? They're not the actual like label. They just sort of say how this label, you know, how does drizzle relate to toppings? Well, it's 6, toppings is 5. This is the one that comes after it. Like as soon as you understand you're looking at steps, you don't need to see the numbers. So we can actually really decrease their importance. And there's a bunch of ways of doing that. One we can do is set the opacity lower. So I just pressed keyboard 5, and that's going to set the opacity to 50%. Like another one is making them lighter. Like this is an option too. I can certainly make them smaller. Like this is just something to play around with. I don't necessarily know what's going to look best, but I have the ability to try out a bunch of options. And as soon as I know that like this does not need to be as visible as the little labels, then I'm just going to be playing with all these ways of kind of styling them down a little bit until I feel like I arrive at something that looks decent. So this looks like at least halfway decent. Good enough. Cool. One other thing is, so Heidi asks, can you design a page in Figma and then transfer it into your website? Yeah, not directly. Like, so I would still be coding this up and writing a lot of HTML, and it's really a whole separate skill. And that sort of development is actually not covered in either of the courses. Just FYI, they're really focused on design rather than coding or development. But yeah, there's not one thing Figma will do, which is nice, is they'll show you some of the CSS properties. So if I like go to this extra bold italic title and I go to inspect, it'll tell me that it has a weight of 800, meaning extra bold, and a style of italic. And so I can copy all of these styles pretty easily. Or I can go, here's the CSS code, right? If I'm writing a website, just grab all that. If I'm writing an Android app, it'll format it slightly differently. So that's nice, but still, it's a lot of work to code it. There's a lot to it.
Not quite as simple as a drag and drop.
Yeah, especially in the age of responsive design, right? Like now there's an expectation, like a poke ordering site or a menu, that's got to work on your mobile phone. You're not going to get away with that being desktop only. So like we're not even done with the design, let alone the development. And this is something I talk about in the course because it's a very real problem. Like no longer can you just say, here's one image that represents the design. Instead, you have to say like, okay, here's my design. But if this design were to get 2 pixels wider, what shifts? Like, where does that extra space go? For every pixel that this design gets wider or more narrow, you have to decide, does it get distributed in the margins and then all of this stuff stays floating in the middle? Does all this stuff stay attached to the left and extra space goes on to the right? Like, sometimes it's fairly obvious and there's like a slim number of patterns that you use, but this is all in the responsive design video in Learn UI Design. All right. So now we have some colors here, but like, as I'm going through, I'm kind of thinking, where else can I add colors? Like one idea. Okay. What's that? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just voicing. Yeah, I want a little more color.
Yeah. So one idea I had, and I don't think this is going to be like a great idea, is we could take these little numbers and make little stars around them. And if we do that, I mean, it kind of looks fun, but like also it's drawing all this attention to something that I said was like the least important element. So in that sense, it's kind of like it's like working backwards. With color, it can be tempting to draw a bunch of it. You want to draw attention to what's important. In both courses, Learn UI Design and Learn UX Design, I talk about how your job as a designer is largely to corral attention effectively, to like make the user look at one thing because it's the most visible, and then they're very naturally going to look at the next thing because it's the next most visible. And like, I just don't know that having 6 real bold colored stars, it would be fun, but it doesn't seem very practical. One place where we might be able to get away with it is like these little add-ons, like plus $3. I'm gonna actually remove that there, put it in a separate text layer, and let's see. I'm gonna style it a bit differently. I might make it bold, but I don't actually want it to be like, if I just make it bold, then it's more visible than soft shell crab. So I'm actually going to make it smaller to kind of counteract the boldness. I refer to this in Learn UI Design as up pop and down pop. Like certain styles draw more attention to something and other styles draw less attention. You already know what these are. If you make it bigger, you're drawing more attention to it. If you make it lighter, you're drawing less attention to it. So there's nothing crazy about this, but it's kind of the interplay between those two types of styles that can really make something look designed. So like, okay, that could be fun. Again, I don't know if practically speaking, it's the best idea to draw all this attention to
the extra charge, the upcharge.
Yeah. But like, at least someone's not going to miss it now, right? And I could do the same thing with this 150, and maybe it has a different color. So look, we're so fun and friendly. Even when we charge you more money, you're gonna love it.
You like it. It's playful.
Exactly.
I love what you're saying, and then we have a couple questions here about how design really is an exercise in guiding your audience to the information that is the most important. And I feel like we talk about this in so many different events that I do with creators where, and this is my background as well. I did speaker coaching. I used to work at TED. And one of the things that we talked about all the time was how to, in a narrative way, focus your design on the information that's the most critical for the audience to connect with. And I think everything that you're saying is, as you're saying it, I'm realizing, oh yeah, this is exactly what I appreciate about good UI and what drives me nuts about bad UI, because it often has to do with the fact that I recognize myself as an audience member and I get really frustrated when my attention is being drawn to something that's clearly not the most important, or when or when it's not being drawn to something that is really important. So it feels like what you're saying is like this really is an audience first exercise, and understanding what you as like an audience member or user in this case, how your brain is processing information is pretty critical to getting that design feeling the way you want it to feel for people.
Yeah, for sure. And like, the more complex the site, the more you actually just want to watch people use it. And this is known in the industry as like
Right.
usability testing. And I talk about this in Learn UX Design. It's more of a UX designer sort of role. In fact, I have this video where I do a usability test live with someone about a site that I designed. It was actually an earlier version of the accessibility tool. And I'm just sort of like explaining, you know, I'm having him go through and use it as he normally would, but then I'm explaining kind of my thought process and how I'm trying to generate questions and but not really lead him down a path, but also understand what his mental model is. Because if you don't watch someone interact with the site, then largely most websites are basically like trying to do a sales pitch where the person you're pitching can't talk to you. You can't see them, and also they're free to walk away at any time. And
It's
also
one-way
you have to read from a
communication.
script. So like it's like that doesn't sound like an easy way to sell something. So if you're not watching someone
Right.
use your site, especially if you're trying to sell something or do something that's like a complex interaction, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
Totally.
Anyhow,
To that
so
end,
time-wise, are we like pretty good here on the example? Should we switch over to questions? Like there's more stuff I could talk about, but I feel like this is good enough. I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good on the example. We do have a few questions I would love to answer, and I want to, you know, also save some time to just kind of revisit your course a little bit. But also, folks, before we dive into that, would love for you to join me in thanking Erik for his time and wisdom and his willingness to generously share this intro to UI and just kind of illustrating some of the foundational principles and the tricks and tools that we have at our disposal to create something that is really audience centric and will give people the feel that you're hoping to create as a designer. So join me in thanking Erik, firstly. Secondly, we did have a few questions come in, Erik. So one specifically about the maybe connected to user testing and usability testing. Do you get into prototyping at all in your course, or can you talk a little bit about how you kind of approach that?
Yeah, I do talk a little bit about prototyping. Each course has a lesson on prototyping. It's actually the same lesson. It's just it's in both courses. There's maybe 3 lessons that are like that. In any case, yeah, so there is a lesson on prototyping. And prototyping is tough because I know Figma did just come out with some updates, like maybe within the last day, that are supposed to be quite interesting in terms of prototyping. But for the most part, it feels like we're sort of in the Stone Age with prototyping, and we just kind of have to put up with like it's the best we've got, even though it's really not perfect. Largely like users, unless you put in an incredible amount of work into creating a prototype, you sort of have to expect that users will follow a pretty set path through their prototype. So with that being said, the best we've got, I do have a video on it in both courses.
Very cool. And let's see, there was another one a little bit further up that I wanted to grab. Oh, actually, this is from quite a bit earlier that I just noticed a bit late. So hoping that the person who asked this question is still on. You mentioned a link to different brand types. I think probably yes. at the top of the session. Was that a YouTube, something that you offer on YouTube?
Yeah.
So
let's see. Is it gonna work? It might not work. Yeah, it's a YouTube video, and it's actually it's the only lesson from Learn UI Design that I've released for free. So what I'm going to do
gotcha. Okay.
is I'll just send it to you right here.
Put it in the private chat. Yeah, I can.
There it is again.
So share it with the folks. Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Right. I will put that in for you, friends. Hope that you are still there to catch it. Sorry for the delay. And would also love to hear anybody from the audience, if you have questions for Erik specifically around UI or the tools that he uses or the principles that he follows, feel free to type those in the chat. In the meantime, Erik, would love for you to share just a little bit about the course that you've got, and especially the one that we're discussing today. And because I think we've got a little bit of a deal on it for these folks who are registered for today's session.
So first of all, I mean, hopefully I'm not just contradicting everything. I don't know that there's like a sale or anything. I've actually made a promise to everyone who purchases the course that you're getting it at sort of the lowest price that's available. So it never actually goes down in price. There's no official sales, but since everyone has lifetime access,
it's just inherently a great deal.
Well, yes. So I honestly believe that. Although I will say, so like the base price is $9.95, right? It's not cheap. What I would say is for folks who are considering it, ask yourself, what is the value I will get out of being able to confidently make designs look nice? Like, is that greater than $9.95? For some people, yes, it's like tens of thousands of dollars. That was certainly my own case. This is like when I was a beginning designer, I would have killed for this. And one of my heuristics for what goes in this course is put in everything that I wish I had known when I was a beginning designer. There's also like, it is lifetime access, but that doesn't like, that is actually a good deal. Like to give you an example, the course was first launched in 2017 on Teachable. And I am still updating it very actively. And in fact, I've just uploaded, I think it's about 6.5 hours. The whole typography unit has just been completely replaced and updated. So there's a lot of new content on that. And so every student has lifetime access. It's very common for me to hear that people are checking in on the course like a year later, rewatching videos, and very frequently saying, wow, I didn't understand, you talked about X and Y. I only grasped it a little bit when I first watched it, but now that I've applied it for a year, I come back and I find there's even more stuff. So it's very much meant to be a lifetime resource. And it's also,
not to mention the tools that you talked about, like the secret Figma file with the fonts that are already classified, and here's like a whole library of stuff that you get access to that you're going to need to come back to, time and again, especially as you hear as those adjective trends come across your desk, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's like I mean, even with these fonts right here, again, some of them are on Adobe fonts, so they're not technically free, but basically they're all free. And when I started designing, I would say less than half of these existed. So like that's going to continue to change. We're probably going to continue to see this renaissance of free fonts. It's going to be awesome, and I will be keeping this up to date. And you're right, design trends change, and that kind of necessitates that some of the content changes. I really try and not speak too much to any one thing that's particularly trendy, or even the one technology. Even though I use Figma for the majority of videos, you can go through the course of Figma. You can use Sketch. You can use Adobe XD. You can also use other apps. I typically recommend those three since they have similar interfaces and similar keyboard shortcuts. But like, if you already really love Affinity Designer, just use that. Because this is not a course about one specific technology, although I do have intro videos for Figma and Sketch.
A few of them.
But instead, it's like a course about the fundamentals that don't change. So, yeah.
Very cool. Well, we are about at time, and it looks like we've got to most of our questions. I am curious to know, as we're wrapping up, what are any final words of wisdom that you have for folks who are kind of in this phase of their journey where they're learning the beginnings of UI? Obviously, if what they want is to know all the things that you wish you'd known when you were a beginning designer, then check out the course. But is in terms of today, any pearls of wisdom you want to share before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, one, there's a bunch of pearls. Probably the best place to get them, pardon me, is you can go to my newsletter, the design newsletter. And right now there's going to be a bunch of emails about the course and stuff related to the course being open for the next week. But then normal programming will resume a week from today, and you'll get a bevy of free emails about like just various design tutorials that I think are largely the most important things for beginners to hear. And like, so one idea, haven't talked about it today, but it's super important, is alignment. I think alignment and the skill of being able to keep things like really nicely aligned is maybe the most underrated thing that UI designers do, or that really good UI designers do. And then another thing that I haven't touched on at all, goodness, is that a lot of fixing bad designs is simply not making certain mistakes. If you can avoid like 30 to 50 pretty common mistakes, your designs will already look much better. And we talked about like, what do you do instead of those mistakes? Well, that whole framework with having a brand and then applying it to color and imagery and typography, like that's a great thing to do. Alignment, that's a great thing to do. But if at a baseline you can avoid a bunch of mistakes, you actually have a lot of leeway for how you do things. So those are just a couple ideas. Both of those happen to be in emails in my newsletter. So go ahead and sign up for that. It's totally free. Everything is original, often pretty long and in depth. But yeah, it's great. Ashley, are you on mute?
Thank you. I was just saying I am really excited to look into this because I launched my own website a few months ago for my consulting business and had so much fun with the UI of it, but haven't really done a deep dive into some of these design elements. So I'm excited to kind of go back at something that I've done through this new lens and see what I can learn and play with and amp up about the design. For everyone, thank you all so much for joining us. Check out the link to Erik's course. We also put the link to the accessibility tool that he shared with us that'll help you make sure that the fonts and backgrounds that you're choosing have the right contrast ratio so that they're accessible. And you should definitely check out the rest of his website, which has some really, really cool information and principles and tools. And of course, the course that we're talking about today, which is pinned to the top of your YouTube channel. So if you like this type of content and you want to discover when we have creators from other fields who are experts like Erik and willing to share some of what they know, like and subscribe. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll let you know. We'll let you know when Erik comes back to do another event with us, and we'll post it when we have other topics and creators you might be interested in learning from. So Erik, if you wouldn't mind hanging around for a second, but we will say goodbye to the rest of our friends. Thank you all for joining us from all over the world. Hope you have a great rest of your day or evening, whatever the case may be. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.